Do the kingly wave.
All of you worked really hard and came up with really amazing projects. So we're really excited to see how these projects happen back on your campus. So make sure you're in touch, send us pictures, tell us how it goes, and we're waiting to hear from you. And give yourself a round of applause.
Okay, so we have something special for you now. So for the last couple of days, we've been talking about the idea of interfaith leadership. We've learned that it involves voicing and engaging and acting and making intentional, inclusive spaces for people of various backgrounds to engage with each other around lines of difference. Cool, we got that. We're all like pretty much interfaith leader pros. But except you're not yet. You'll get there one day. So actually, to help you think a little bit more about what it means to be an interfaith leader, we have someone really special. He is the founder and president of the Interfaith Youth Corps. He's author of 2 books, Acts of Faith and Sacred Ground. And at the end of the day, and most importantly, he is my boss. So everyone give Eboo Patel a warm round of applause.
Hi, everyone. First ILI, where I think most of the groups have done ILI cheers. I appreciate that. Where's the 2.0 group? Can you guys take a little bit of ribbing? I think 3.0 is when you learn how to clap and sing at the same time. Not that a little bit of this, a little bit of that wasn't great, but you know, put them together, right? Peanut butter and jelly, like. All right. IFYC staff, give it up for them. This is second ILI in like 4 weeks. Adam Garner will give you a day off in 2015. We're thinking about it. But seriously, Janan, Prerna, Rahel, William, the whole team, thank you so much for April, who has been doing this for, 12 years in some way, shape, or form. Thank you so much for just, overall awesomeness. Where are the allies in the room? Stand up. Yeah. So, I was thinking about you on the way over as I was leaving a blizzard that was about to dump 8 inches of snow in Chicago for 70 degrees in LA. By the way, is it ethical to feel guilty about that, or is it okay to not feel guilty? But I was thinking about the allies, right? Because I feel like the people who believe in you when you are young, you will remember for the rest of your life. Right? And I think back to when I was, 19, 20, 21 with a head full of radical spangles, and whoever took me seriously, even just a little bit then, right? I remember now in a big way. And so all of you who stood up, all of the allies, Jim here at USC, all the folks, Jacqueline at Concordia, folks that I don't know, haven't met yet, you have and are about to make a very big difference in the lives of a group of interfaith leaders on your campus. And so a big thank you for that. And it got me thinking actually about, an ally in my life, and somebody that I look up to who exemplifies interfaith leadership. And I wanted to start these handful of remarks by talking about Ruth Messenger. Is that a familiar name to anybody in the room, by the way? Ruth Messenger? So Ruth Messenger, she's the president of the American Jewish World Service. For a long time, she was the Manhattan Borough president, ran for mayor of New York, lost to Rudy Giuliani about 15 years ago. But she's just kind of a major force in social change in America. And in 1998, 1999, when a handful of us were first thinking about the idea of a movement of young people who oriented around religion differently coming together for social action, it was Ruth Messenger that invited us into her office at the American Jewish World Service in New York and let us tell her our big idea. And we've kept in touch over the past 12, 14 years. Gosh, it's been a long time since then. And maybe 2 years ago, Ruth came to IFYC's offices in Chicago, and one of our staff colleagues, Alana, said, how did you get started in this? And she kind of, rolled her eyes into her head for a minute and thought, she's like, it was a long time ago. I had just finished grad school. I had gotten my first job. I was working for the state government of Oklahoma in the western part of the state, helping kids, largely Native American kids, get foster families. These were kids who were in orphanages. And I would travel, into the deepest places in western Oklahoma, and the people who felt the power and the resonance of being foster families for these kids were people who were as different from me as you could imagine. And she was like, think about this. I was Jewish. I was from New York. It was the 1960s. I was a part of that whole movement. I was graduate school educated, and the people that I spent the most time with working around foster care were Southern Baptists from western Oklahoma. And I'm like, do you go to church every Sunday? She's like, yes. And Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And sometimes it was like, wood frame churches, and sometimes it was backyards, and sometimes it was front porches. But I was there for all the praise songs and for all the altar calls and for all the sermons. And I sat in the back of all of those gatherings, and I heard a bunch of things I didn't agree with and a bunch of stuff that, sometimes offended me. But I thought to myself that these were the people who cared the most about the thing that I cared the most about, which was finding foster homes for these kids. And at the end of the sermons and the praise songs and the altar calls, the preacher would get up there and would say, there's a woman here with us today who is in charge of getting foster families for a group of children in our area who don't have families. Who will come forth and answer God's call for being foster families and giving loving homes to these kids? And Ruth said, we always got our families. And I think that, I don't think I realized it at the time when she was telling that story, but I thought, this is 2 years ago, and I thought about that, week upon week, and I thought to myself, how many ways did Ruth Messenger and these Southern Baptists in Oklahoma differ, right? I mean, on probably all the great social issues of the time, the birth control pill, abortion, whether women should be educated, whether they should be working outside of the home. I imagine that there might have been some difference about the power and efficacy and necessity and size of government. And, some folks in this room probably align and sympathize a lot more with Ruth Messenger, and some folks maybe align and sympathize more with those Southern Baptists in western Oklahoma. But the thing that got me was that Ruth Messenger never turned around and walked out of a church because she was offended by something. And one of the preachers never said, we won't have one of your kind here. What struck me was that these people from vastly different social, political, theological places decided that they had something more important in common to work on. And there are hundreds, maybe thousands of kids, Native American kids in western Oklahoma who grew up in loving families as a result of that decision. So that's what I think of when I think of better together, right? And there's versions of interfaith work that are basically about circling religiously diverse wagons around points of mutual agreement, right? People who are like me in lots of different ways. I live in Chicago. I guess you could call me an urban liberal. I'm grad school educated. There's a whole tribe of folks who are like me. And I walk into a room of those people, I think, I love being with you. But this isn't interfaith work, right? And I really can't call, however colorful that room is, however many plates full of interesting ethnic foods, if that room doesn't contain some people with whom I have profound theological and political and social differences, it's not interfaith work. It's lots of other really interesting and wonderful things. But I think interfaith work is the work of deep democracy, right? Deep diversity. How else do you have a country of 320-some million people unless those of us who disagree with other people on some things are able to work with them on other things? And every time I have that realization, I go back and I think of Ruth Messenger, right, in her early to mid-20s, not a whole lot older than most of the folks in this room, going to western Oklahoma, and I think about those Southern Baptist preachers looking at this woman and thinking, man, we are gulfs apart, and we are going to build a bridge. And that bridge didn't fall from the sky, and it didn't rise from the ground. Those people made a decision to build it. They made a decision that the work that they were doing together, the work on finding foster homes for those kids was more important than their differences for that particular moment. That doesn't mean that Ruth and those folks didn't see themselves on other sides of the picket line sometimes. That doesn't mean that Ruth didn't vote against those people on important elections. That doesn't mean you didn't send money to organizations that disagree with them on important things. It's just that she realized that those disagreements shouldn't define the entire relationship. The only way you have a democracy that's diverse is for people to disagree on some things and work together on other things. And the only way you have that in a democracy is if a group of people are able to lead for it, a group of people that we call interfaith leaders. So Janan, my colleague at IFYC, who, by the way, puts all of these things together, thank you for doing that with her terrific team. So Janan loves this story from the early days of Islam, and she tells it a lot better than I do, but since my big ears are up here, you'll have to do with me. And it's a story of how, in the early days of the Prophet's mission, may the peace and blessings of God be upon him, folks in Mecca, especially the Quraysh tribe, which was the dominant tribe at the time, were not very happy about a message of egalitarianism, a message of interracial harmony, a message that was beyond tribe, right? A message that focused on one God and that focused on mercy. And they hounded him and they harassed him, and it got so dangerous that he was actually concerned that these people might wipe out Islam, might kill everybody. So he sent a small contingent of his followers, of his companions, to Abyssinia in present-day Ethiopia. Anybody know why he sent them to that particular kingdom, Abyssinia? The king in Abyssinia was a Christian, a man known as the Negus. And the Prophet Muhammad believed, rightfully it turns out, that a Christian king, once he heard a little bit more about Islam, would protect this small group of Muslims. But there was a troublemaker, a handful of them actually, in Abyssinia. And they were whispering in the ear of the Negus, do you know how many places these people's religion differs from your own? Do you know that they don't believe in Jesus as the Son of God? Do you know that they don't believe in Jesus as Lord and Savior? Do you know that they believe in a prophet named Muhammad? And so finally the Negus said, well, bring these people to me. I want to actually hear about their religion directly from them. And the sources tell us that what the Muslims did at the time was they gathered in the court of the Negus, and here he was with his bishops and his court, and these regal men with their long flowing beards dressed in cloaks, and they read to this court from the verses of the Quran that speak of Mary. And we Muslims have a very similar view of Mary as Christians do, actually, that Mary was a virgin, that the angel Gabriel brought the baby Jesus to Mary, and read these verses. And the sources say that the Negus and his court were so moved by those verses that the tears flowed down their cheeks and they soaked their beards. And the Negus, and Janan tells this part so beautifully, takes his staff and he draws a line in the sand and says, the difference between your faith and mine is no thicker than the line in this sand. I will grant you my protection. You may stay here. Right? And when I think about that story up in relation to Ruth Messenger's story, I think to myself, the truth is Islam differs in a lot of ways from Christianity. And when those Muslims came to the court, they could have said, we don't believe in Jesus as the Son of God, and that would have been accurate. They came to the court, they could have said, we don't believe in Jesus as Lord and Savior the way that you do. We don't believe Jesus was crucified and died on the cross the way that you do. Right? They didn't do that. They came to the Negus's court and they found a point of contact. A point of contact, in this case, that happened to be theological. As Ruth's was a service-oriented point of contact, this was a theological point of contact. We have a very similar view of the holiness of Mary as you do. That's the exercise and challenge of interfaith leadership. When you come upon somebody or a group that is different from you, is your first instinct going to be to widen the gulf of that difference, important as it might be? And again, the thing that I want to remind us all of is that the difference between Ruth Messenger and those Southern Baptists in Oklahoma were profound. The differences between Islam and Christianity theologically are profound. And yet, these people in these situations chose to what we call lead with pluralism. Find the point of contact, build the bridge there. Find the opportunity for intersection and say, our lines connect here. The first thing that I'm going to do with you is build a relationship on a matter of commonality. I'm going to say a word about this thing, commonality. Here's how I most often hear the word commonality used in interfaith settings. People will roll their eyes and say, oh, all we're doing is talking about our commonalities. All we're doing is talking about I'm thinking to myself, isn't it beautiful when people from different backgrounds are able to say, look at the areas in which we have profound fundamental differences, and yet we choose to come together on this matter of commonality? And it occurred to me that part of what interfaith leaders do is not just find that commonality, right? Ruth Messenger wasn't an interfaith leader just because she identified the cause of orphans in western Oklahoma. Those Muslims in Abyssinia weren't interfaith leaders just because they knew about the commonality of Mary. It's because they had an additional skill and quality. They had the ability to make it inspiring. That's a huge part of what we do. We make commonality inspiring. We make it something that other people want to be involved in. There's a lot of ways of talking about commonality, a lot of ways of talking about interfaith work that are frankly boring. And I wrote a whole chapter in my last book, Sacred Ground, called The Art of Interfaith Leadership. It really could have been one sentence. If it's not inspiring, nobody cares. A huge part of interfaith leadership is making that commonality inspiring. So today is President's Day. I know this because I owe my wife one. She's the one staying home with the kids today. So in about 2 weeks, I will reciprocate and stay home with the kids one day. President's Day. U.S. presidents have made a lot of mistakes, and they've done a lot of remarkable things. Right? January 20th, 2008, Barack Obama inaugural address. We know our patchwork heritage is a strength, not a weakness. We are a nation of Christians and Muslims, of Hindus and Jews and non-believers. We believe a shrinking planet reveals our common humanity, and that America will one day play its role as a force for peace in the world again. George Bush, 7 years earlier, 48 hours after 9/11, goes to a mosque, says that Islam means peace, looks deep and hard into the camera and says, if you go after our Muslim citizens in this country, we will prosecute you to the fullest extent of the law. Make no mistake about it. A few years earlier, Bill Clinton resurrected a tradition first started by Thomas Jefferson, holding iftars at the White House. We have that question on our Interfaith Literacy quiz, by the way. Nobody ever gets it right. Who's the first president to hold iftars at the White House? Thomas Jefferson. But President's Day is really in celebration of George Washington. And as I was researching Sacred Ground, I learned that George Washington, despite a whole range of failings, including owning slaves, which I think is just unforgivable, America's original sin, George Washington was an interfaith leader, quite remarkably so, actually. In the Revolutionary War, when he heard about anti-Catholic divisions in the Continental Army, he wrote to his lieutenants and generals and he said that kind of anti-Catholic prejudice is absolutely monstrous. That was the first truly national American institution, George Washington's Army. And he was putting a stake in the ground. This was going to be a place that welcomed people from all different faith backgrounds. When a group of workmen were going to work on his estate, Mount Vernon, he made very clear that they could be of any religion. He names Muslims, Christians, Jews, Quakers, or of no faith at all, as long as they could make their contributions. But my favorite George Washington moment comes early in his presidency, when he receives a message from a man named Moses Sessions. Sessions was the leader of the Hebrew congregation of Newport, Rhode Island, a synagogue. This is in 1791 in the United States. And Sessions was scared. He was scared about what was going to happen to Jews in the new nation, knew full well what had happened to Jews for many centuries in Europe. And so he asks Washington, basically, will our people be safe here? will my community be able to live here peacefully? And Washington takes his time in responding, and he sends back a letter with these words: "This government will give bigotry no sanction and persecution no assistance. May the children of the stock of Abraham live in safety under their own vine and fig, and let there be none to make them afraid." He ends the letter with this line, which is the epigraph to Sacred Ground. He says, "May the Lord of all mercies scatter light and not darkness, and make each of us useful in our vocation, and give us happiness in his everlasting way." The thing I love about America, about this country of 320 million people, most of whom I disagree with on most things, and yet I am a fellow citizen, is that from the beginning there were people who knew that the only way you build a diverse democracy is to have a set of leaders who believe that despite the disagreements, we are better together. We are that new generation. It's good to be with you. Thank you.
We can take a couple of questions. If you have one, raise your hand and I'll bring you a mic.
I doubt that.
Thank you so much. I think that last speech we almost came to tears right now, just in all honesty. But I kind of want to bring up maybe if you could tell us an experience of where someone kind of came at you with such kind of negativity, and you came, and how we can best, learn from your actions, because, there's constantly times that we were talking in 2.0 where some of the hardest actions that we have to come with is meeting those negative, instances with such positivity. And I constantly find myself with anger, and I feel like it's something that we've been conditioned with. So how do we break that?
Thank you for that. So I'm not great at that, right? But I have but I'm going to tell you stories of people who I admire who are great at that. And look, everybody gets to draw their own line. So there's things that people aren't, that I will probably walk out of a room for, right? At the same time, if I'm an interfaith leader, I can't walk out of a room when on any particular disagreement, right? I mean, the insult has to be at a certain pitch. Now, let me be clear. Everybody gets to draw their own line, right? So I'll tell two personal stories. I don't know how well I did in these, but I'll tell a couple of other stories of other folks who I deeply admire. So I'm an Ismaili Muslim. We're a small community of Shia Muslims whose practice is different in a lot of ways than other Muslims. And I'm proud of being an Ismaili, and I'm also very proud of being part of the larger ummah. And sometimes there's an interesting tension in that. So I'm getting toured around a very interesting Muslim education center. And the gentleman who's giving me the tour, the founder of the center, finds out that I'm from India, at which fact he is very happy. So he starts to talk. He's from India as well. He extols all the virtues of India, and then he starts to badmouth Pakistan, which, by the way, I could have seen that coming 10 miles away, right? So he's like, and Pakistan this, and Pakistan that, and he's like, and this was like, he said this was like, you could see him almost wanting to spit. He's like, and it was founded by an Ismaili. And I'm like, at which point, I'm like, so I made a decision at that point, right? Like there was a lot of things that I could do, but I made a decision that was not the time for me to say to him, look, you racist jerk, do you know who you're talking to? Not that I didn't think that, right? And he found out that I was an Ismaili, probably some weeks later, probably somebody told him, and I imagine he felt bad about that, right? So that's a decision that I made in that particular moment. I was not long ago. I gave a talk at a Rotary Club. I won't tell you where it is. And guy comes up to him and he says, "So how should we feel about your friends killing our soldiers in Afghanistan?" And I'm like, "My friends?" right? So, I mean, I feel like for me in that moment, the best thing to do was to take a deep breath and to say the Shahada, and I was gonna be the Muslim Mr. Rogers, and that's what I was, right?
That's your new title, Eboo.
That's right, exactly. I got a sweater for my talk tonight, actually. So last little story I'll tell, because I think this is so important, and the thing that I want to emphasize is everybody gets to draw their own line, right? But I think what we ought to be conscious of is if you're writing 80% of your fellow citizens out with the lines that you draw, as Cornel West says, just have a Socratic moment, just if every disagreement you have on deep fundamental issues, you decide you can't talk to those people because it's too insulting for you, have a Socratic moment. So I think when I saw this done the best, April and I were together. We were in Australia, and this is like 8 years ago. And sometimes people think the best way to do an interfaith conversation is to have a cage fight, which I think is the worst thing to do. But they'll get the fieriest person from one religion and the most fiery person from another religion. They'll put them on stage and they'll take the most divisive issue they can think of, and they'll basically say, fight, right? So that's what these guys did at this event in Australia. And it happened to be a Christian that began, and just a stream of 7 minutes of invective about Muslims and Islam. And in this case, he happened to be a Pakistani Christian. And he talked about, never meeting a good Muslim, and how Muslims that he knew in Pakistan only harassed him, and all this kind of stuff, right? And then the thing he said that was the icing was, he said, the only thing that I'm grateful for is that none of these Muslims ever rose to the wickedness, to the hurt that the Prophet Muhammad actually did. Okay, so I'm an interfaith leader. The hair on the back of my neck is starting to rise. I am that is across my line, right? And the other guy, the Muslim on stage, by the way, this dude looks like he walked straight out of the 12th century, right? He's got a cloak on, he's got a staff. It looks like he was in a cave meditating for the last 5 years. And I'm like, time to use that staff, bro, come on now, come on now. And the guy, beard's down to here, he turns around and he says, I think this is the part where people expect me to insult Jesus and Christians, but I love Jesus and I admire Christians too much to do that. And the only thing I have to say to you is I wish that you had had a chance to meet Muslims who embody the kind of mercy that our prophet, that Rasulullah, embodied. Whoosh. So beautiful, right? And I think to myself, number one, that took crazy grace, but if you just want to look at strategically, who won that round? Right? And so that was a profound learning moment for me.
All right. I'm going to start with the back and then come back to you. Keep your hands raised.
Hi. So my question is kind of the opposite. What about not people who are negative to interfaith, but people who are apathetic to interfaith, who think because they maybe don't identify with the religion or they're half identify with the religion, they don't have a stake in interfaith?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I think that the challenge of an interfaith leader is to find stories that are compelling to a variety of populations, right? And so what are inspiring stories that you could find and tell that are going to work for, maybe it's secular humanists, maybe it's agnostics, maybe it's folks who aren't sure that they care yet, right? But I think that that's what the definition of a leader is. What I mean by that is forgive this terrible analogy. I will pre-apologize to my staff. This is terrible analogy number 112 for the year. I'm full of terrible analogies. But it's, when a mountain climber looks at a mountain, she doesn't say, why the hell's the mountain there, right? What mountain climbers do is climb mountains. What I mean by that, by way of analogy, is what leaders do is inspire people. So your friends or colleagues who don't yet know what their stake is in interfaith work, once you start calling yourself an interfaith leader, the definition of who you are, your identity, is is inspiring those folks. It's the equivalent of the mountain to the mountain climber, right? A leader is not just someone who creates the program. A leader is not just someone who attends the meeting. A leader is someone who charges up other people about something they might not ever have heard of. So if you were to watch me walking back and forth to the train to go to work, you would see me mumbling the whole time, and it's not because I'm loopy, right? It's because I'm practicing stories. Like, I'm constantly practicing stories. I'm constantly thinking, so this group of people isn't particularly engaged in interfaith work. Great. I need to find a set of stories that inspire them. So I'm reading about stories, I'm listening to new stories, and I'm practicing ways of telling those stories. So, my advice to you is to, first of all, to understand that this is the challenge. This is the mountain, right? It's inspiring different sets of people about interfaith work. The second thing is to find stories that you think are going to resonate with particular groups of people. And the third thing is to tell them, learn how to tell them in a way that's inspiring. 15 years in, and I would say I'm halfway there.
Someone in the Malcolm X room said, I think it was earlier today, that every movement needs a Rosa Parks moment. What is your personal Rosa Parks moment that inspired you?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I would say there's a couple of them. In the civil rights movement, there were a lot of Rosa Parks moments, right? A lot of Rosa Parks moments, from Jackie Robinson to Emmett Till to Rosa Parks to lots and lots and lots of things, to Four Little Girls in Birmingham. So one was watching a group of kids in my high school go after my Jewish friend, and realizing that none of us, including me, was doing anything about it, and that the people who had the language of the people who were willing to talk about religion were the ones who were using bigoted language, and none of us had either kind of a radar screen or a language with which to stand up for that. And kind of defend his. We knew what was happening was wrong, but we didn't know enough about what his religion meant to him to have a sense of what was happening, of like the deep sears and scars that were taking place during that time. So that's when I was like 16, 17 years old. That was profound. I guess the second profound moment for me was in college, being involved in diversity work, and my dad saying to me after I was giving him my umpteenth lecture on people of color consciousness, him saying at one point, you talk about diversity all the time, but you never talk about the dimension of diversity that's driving the world, and that's religious diversity. And the following week is when Yitzhak Rabin got assassinated. So those two moments, I look back on and I think to myself that that's I guess when I thought to myself, I was missing something. I guess the third one is the hero side of the Rosa Parks moment, right? Which is the recognition that I had at some point that my heroes, and I wasn't a particularly religious in college, and so I wasn't like looking in a religious frame, but I woke up one day and kind of realized out of nowhere that my heroes were people of deep faith across religious traditions, and that was kind of a striking realization for me in 1996 or 1997. And now, my world has expanded, and I would add a whole set of secular humanists to that pantheon of heroes. But back then, realizing, that Gandhi was Hindu, Dorothy Day was Catholic, Martin Luther King Jr. was a Baptist, Abraham Joshua Heschel was Jewish, Malcolm X and Bacha Khan were Muslim, and wow, these people had done, the Dalai Lama and Thich Nhat Hanh were Buddhists. These people had done remarkable things, and they all talked about the role of their faith tradition in that. I wanted to know more. But that's an interesting question is, what's your Rosa Parks moment, right? That's a really beautiful way of putting it, right? Which is, what is it in your personal life that both the ugly side of it, right, the segregation side of it, and also the hero side of it, that brings you into this room. I think that's a really beautiful way of putting it. Thank you. Hi, Ruth.
First of all, what a pleasure it is to have you with us here in California.
Good to be here.
As an interfaith activist for almost 30 years, one of the things I've noticed is that even the term interfaith is being challenged, and there are people who are trying to change it to interspiritual, or they're looking for other vocabulary. And we know from the Pew research that more and more students on campus, when asked to identify the religion, are writing none, and so they started even calling them the nuns. as a result of that, which I don't think is such a good name for them. But my question to you is, like, as you see this interfaith movement growing, shifting, changing, evolving, and you still have the name, the Interfaith Youth Corps, right? And you know that there are more and more students who won't come because of faith, but who could be led to come because they would be inspired to do something for the community. How are you changing the way you are approaching students on campuses, and what do you think will be, let's say, 25 years from now? Do you still see this will be under the rubric of Interfaith Youth Corps?
Let me tell you something. As I push 40, I have a lot more angst about the youth part than the interfaith part. I wish that was a joke. So I think that's a good point, right? And may there be many arguments about terms, and basically what we do at IFYC is we define why we use the term interfaith. I'll tell you why it is right now. It's a very geeky grad school type definition. Inter for us means the interaction between people who orient around religion differently. Faith we take out of Cantwell Smith, which is people's relationship with their tradition or traditions, whether that is a kind of an orthodox relationship with the tradition of Islam, or whether it's a relationship with secular humanism, or whether it's a relationship with many things, with searching, right? Is the notion is that we want people to come in here and we want them to reflect upon a set of experiences and perhaps texts and people who you could organize into things called traditions. We just want them to reflect upon that, right? So that's, for us, interfaith is, how does your relationship with your tradition or traditions impact the way you view interacting with diversity? And how do your interactions with diversity impact the way that you view your tradition or traditions, right? So that's how we view. But if folks want to use the word multi-faith, we are not going to argue about it for an hour. We're going to be like, great, if that's what you want to use it, right? We're not going to, so that's, and there will be many academic journals filled with these questions, and I think that that's great, and all of us left grad school to start a social action organization because we didn't want to write academic articles about whether we wanted to use the word interfaith or multi-faith.
All right, we're going to do one last question. I'll have all of you do it. Okay, everyone give your question, and Eboo can respond.
That's right. Hey, good to see you again.
Yeah, Ali Madat.
Malali Madat.
Eboo, I know you are an extremely busy human being. I think all of us know that by now. And as a person who's been doing interfaith work for not as long as Miss Ruth or yourself, I do get sort of anxious and impatient on trying to get people to work together. And one line that really runs well with me is that even in the most barren of deserts, progress is the blossoming of a single flower. And I want to know what resonates with you in terms of the patience that you have in trying to get interfaith work done and seeing interfaith cooperation as a social norm.
Every time I think of that line, I'm going to think of you from now on. Thank you. Oh. You like that, William? Thank you. That was from William.
It's Tahil's birthday today.
It's happy birthday. Happy birthday.
I think a huge part of interfaith work is reaching out to college-age students, and something we talked about a lot over the course of this conference is the importance of religious literacy and education. And so my question is, do you think that interfaith dialogue and religious literacy is something that will eventually be incorporated into our public school system?
Yeah. That is like a flower in a desert. I owe you a birthday something.
So last night just a group of us were talking about sort of the more radical religious groups. And my question is, how do you balance your convictions in social justice with your convictions in interfaith work?
Oh, yeah. These are great questions. Okay, so I mean, patience. So there's a great line by Gary Snyder who says, your job is to move the world a millionth of an inch. And I used to wake up every day and I would look at the earth. I'd be like, did you move, damn it? I couldn't see it move, So, look, I feel like I've been doing this for 15 years now. I wake up every day, I'm like, I'm blessed to do this, right? And every day I wake up and I'm like, I hope we get a little bit better, right? I hope we get a little bit better. And honestly, at IFYC, doesn't mean you have to be like this, but we're playing the long game, right? We're playing the 30-year game, right? And that means that there's going to be a bunch of setbacks and there's going to be a bunch of crazy stuff that's happening, but that overall we believe that betting on college campuses and betting on young people and betting on positive narratives of diversity is the arc is long, but it bends towards justice, as King said. So I don't think that there's. King also said you can't wait for the pendulum to swing. You have to push it. I think one of the challenges of any leader is to know when you just got to let it swing and when you got to push, right? So I want to. I don't know when this is going to hit the public schools. Modesto, California did a very interesting experiment in world religions teaching. It was written up by a place called the First Amendment Center. It's a good senior thesis for people in this room to maybe think about. But I think that this is going to take root in public schools in some way, shape, or form. I just don't know how, but that's one of the reasons we bet on 19-year-olds, because you guys are going to figure out how, right? There's going to be a handful of you in this room who are like, you know what? It's kind of crazy that I had to dissect a frog to graduate high school, but I didn't have to know a damn thing about the religion of a fifth of humankind, right? That's nuts. And so I'm gonna figure out something to do about that, right? So may you take that on as your mission. May some of you take that on as your mission, and. So maybe that will be you. I think that's a great idea. By the way, a great resource on that is Diane Moore, who's at Harvard Divinity School, who runs the Religion in Secondary Schools project, and that's precisely what she does. And she's written a bunch of things. And again, a great senior thesis project for you. Interfaith and social justice. I think that's a profound question. Here's the hard fact, right? And the beautiful fact that Ruth Messenger and those. Southern Baptists in Western Oklahoma had different views on some things that counted as social justice, right? And they had similar views on some things. So, honestly, we use the word, we kind of in professional speak, rarely use the word social justice at IFYC. In professional speak. It doesn't mean that people at IFYC have deep justice commitments, right? Personal and private justice commitments, and of course they bring those to work in a variety of ways. And we know that when you're dealing with religious diversity, let's break that down for a second. Diversity doesn't just mean interesting ethnic foods. Diversity means disagreements, right? Religion, Pace Tillich, ultimate concerns, fundamental things. If you're dealing with religious diversity, you are dealing with disagreements on fundamental things. You're dealing with disagreements about the 10 most live issues in U.S. and global politics today. Abortion, gay marriage. Where should the line be drawn in the Middle East? Should it be drawn at all? Should contraception be included in the Obama healthcare plan? So one concern that I have developed about using the term interfaith social justice is when I use that term, do I really mean I am only gathering a group of people who have the same view of justice as I do? And I have strong views on justice, right? And I actually don't think that that's what interfaith work is about. I think that interfaith work is about gathering people who have a range of views on ultimate concerns and fundamental matters and having them work together anyway. And I think that that's what Ruth Messenger was doing in Western Oklahoma, right? She wasn't saying, you have to agree with me on these 6 social issues, the Vietnam War, abortion, the pill, who knows what else, that were alive in the 1960s. She was saying, my guess is we disagree profoundly on many important things. And we have this really powerful thing in common. And for the times when we are together in these situations, we're going to choose to intersect on those things, right? So I started to use the words interfaith social action a lot more, because I think that people from a range of backgrounds can agree on a range of action issues, even if they might not be able to agree on a range of justice, quote unquote justice issues, so to speak. But I hope these are the kinds of things that you guys stay up till 3 a.m. discussing, right? Like, what's the difference between an action issue and a justice issue? Are there people with justice commitments who you feel uncomfortable with having in your circle? What does that say about the diversity of your circle? Right? So I will tell a quick story that's a self-reflective story about IFYC, actually. And then I'll close with a piece of poetry, and then we'll go on our merry ways. So at IFYC, we have diversity conversations all the time. And in 12 years, we're always, always, always trying to widen our circle of diversity. And sometimes folks are, we're passionate about it, right? And 3 months ago, we hired our first vet. And it occurred to me, in 12 years at IFYC, over 100 staff people, some of the smartest and best people I've known in my life, I have never heard a single person once say, we ought to expand our diversity by having a vet on our staff. What? A veteran. Not somebody who operates on horses. Sorry. I should have known where I was. Right. Oh, sweet raccoon, you're going to live, A veteran. Right. But I think to myself, right, like that's a really powerful identity. And frankly, it's a marginalized one, right? And it hadn't occurred to anybody during a time of war in the United States, when veterans were coming back all the time, that we ought to be proactive about having a veteran on our staff. That doesn't mean we're bad people. That doesn't mean we didn't care about diversity. It meant that we, like anybody else, we cared about our particular definition of diversity, right? And you meet Keith and you're like, oh my gosh, I should just check my blind spots every once in a while, right? And ask myself, when I'm using the word diversity, how wide is my circle, right? How wide is my circle? And I think the definition of interfaith work is bringing a range of people together from a range of different views and having them work together on powerful things. And I think that doesn't happen unless there are leaders in the room who take that on. So here's the piece of poetry, and then I hope you have a glorious afternoon in beautiful Southern California. Per the conversation we were just having from Edward Markham, he writes in this beautiful little stanza, you drew a circle that drew me out, heretic rebel, a thing to flout, but love and I had the wit to win. We drew a circle that drew you in. Thank you.